Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. This is the show that I made for people like you who are trying their hardest to learn another language because it's difficult and it takes a really long time. So I wanted to create something that is something you can listen to every week, twice a week, to give you ideas, solve your problems, give you some motivation to keep going. And, since I started the podcast, I was wondering, who's out there? Who's actually listening to me? So I'd love to hear from you. Why don't you drop me a line at olly@iwillteachyoualanguage.com and say hi. Let me know who you are, what you're learning, and how you're getting on. I'd love to hear from you. Now, let's get to today's question from Cecilia.
Hi, Olly. I've been really enjoying your podcast. Today I've got you a question. I'd like to know, how do you go about learning a language that is completely different to yours?
Cecilia, thank you very much for your question. It's a great question because I've got a lot of first-hand experience with this, and it's all about whether the language that you're learning is close to your target language if it's close to your mother tongue or not. Now, when I first started learning languages, I had a very similar experience to what lots of other people have, which is that I learned a bunch of languages that are relatively close to mine. Okay, so I am obviously a native English speaker. The first foreign language I learned was French. After that, it was Italian, and then Spanish, and then Portuguese. Now, this might sound familiar, and lots of people kind of go in a similar route, which is to say they learn a lot of languages from the same root. French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, they are very, very close languages, and once you've learned one, learning the next is quite, I wouldn't say easy, but it's relatively straightforward because a lot of the vocabulary and the grammar are very, very similar. You just have to kind of learn how to change from one to the next, and it's already fairly familiar to you. So when I first started learning these languages, I thought I was great. Look at this: French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. So I was fairly pleased with myself until one day I got on a plane and went to Japan, and a year and a half, 2 years later, I still couldn't really speak Japanese. I just didn't know what was going on. Now, the reason, of course, was that Japanese is extremely different to virtually any other language, certainly from the West. But I didn't realize that at the time, and I just thought that I was naturally pretty good at languages. But when I went to Japan and learned Japanese, I discovered the cold, hard truth, which is that if you're learning a language that's very different to your own, you really have to work at it. And so I really resonate with your question, Cecilia, because, it's tough. So that's my background. I learned a bunch of European languages, which were all very close together. And then after that, I went to learn Japanese, and then Cantonese, and then Arabic, which are all very, very different from English and have completely different roots, and whose grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation are also very difficult. So if you are learning a completely different language, how can you do it? Well, I'm going to give you 3 different tips, or 3 different areas that you need to think about. The first of which is you need to leave plenty of time to get used to the language. The second is you need to have regular exposure. And then number 3, deliberate practice. Okay, so number 1, time. Number 2, regular exposure. And number 3, deliberate practice. So let's break these down a little bit. First of all, time. Now, the reason that time is so important is because one of the biggest dangers in learning a new language is the fact that you sense that you're not getting it. You sense that you're not making progress, and this manifests itself in frustration. You get very frustrated at the fact that you just don't feel that you're understanding, that you just don't get it. I know that you're familiar with this feeling. We've all had it, but this is all based on the assumption that you should be able to study and learn a language, but it doesn't work like that. You need to leave a lot of time. Sometime, I can't say how long. Maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 6 months. But there comes a point where enough time has passed that you start to get it. The language starts to make sense. And so whatever language you're learning, however you're studying it, you have to factor in time into the equation. All right, and if you're getting frustrated with something, remember this, and remember that you might just need to leave more time in order for it to all to make sense. So the point here is that it's not your fault if you are finding something particularly difficult in the language, you need to give it time. Now, time doing what? Well, this brings us to number 2, which is regular exposure. Obviously, there's no point giving it plenty of time, but not actually doing anything with that time. So you need to make sure that every day, if possible, you're spending time with the language such that your brain can start to kind of process it, become familiar with it. And this means basically a lot of reading, a lot of listening, and as far as possible, a lot of speaking with people as well. So if you're a beginner, then the best thing to do is to go to your textbooks, use whatever materials you've got that have audio recordings, ideally with written text as well, so that you can listen and read at the same time. And then just try to keep this up every day, and again, not worrying whether you understand it or not, whether it all makes sense, but actually just spending time with the language, just being surrounded by it. What will happen is that you're gradually, if you keep doing this over time, the differences, your question was all about a language that's very different to yours. Well, the differences will gradually become familiar. So you stop being so kind of confused and bewildered by the differences, and they gradually start to make sense. I know this doesn't sound particularly scientific, but this is exactly what happens. And I found, certainly with my Japanese and my Cantonese and my Arabic, that this is exactly what happens, and it's very difficult to quantify. For me, 6 months has always been a threshold. In all the languages, in all of these languages, I found that after kind of 6 months of frustration and general study and whatever I'm doing, something changes after the 6 month time. So I always kind of try to keep in the back of my mind, well, let's just keep this up for 6 months, because I know that I'm going to reach a tipping point of a kind after 6 months. So that might help in terms of setting a kind of milestone for you. Now, so that's number 1. Number 1 is time to get used to it. Number 2 is regular exposure to the language. Number 3 is deliberate practice. Because if you're learning a language which has tricky grammar, in particular, such as Russian or Arabic, for example, then it's unlikely that you're going to be able to pick up all of the different intricacies of the language just by exposure. So you're going to have to get to a point where you start to deliberately practice the things that are difficult. And most people will say that when you get to that stage, when it's time to start to get more accurate and to start to understand the language better, one of the best things you can do is to find a really good teacher. I don't think you need a teacher in the early stages of learning a language, because, like I say, the most important thing is this familiarity. So you just need to spend lots of time reading and listening in order for the language to become familiar to you. So you don't need a teacher for that. But when a teacher becomes really, really useful is when you've got to get into the nitty-gritty of actually understanding and using these difficult grammar points, for example. So it's easier said than done, because finding a good teacher is extremely difficult. I often have to spend time with a whole bunch of different teachers before I find one who I really like. But what a really great teacher can do is to spot the mistakes that are becoming kind of ingrained in your language, and they can fix them. They can then explain to you very clearly what those mistakes are and what you need to do in order to get over them and to improve. And then they can also suggest useful, efficient, effective ways of actually practicing. And this is important because even if you're a talented language learner or a natural language learner, there's only so much self-awareness that you've got, and a teacher who knows what they're doing can come in and can just take you to the next level and just help raise your general awareness of your language and how you're doing with it. So just to recap then, number 1, you have to leave plenty of time to get used to the language. Number 2, you need to get that regular exposure. You need to be spending time with the language every single day. And then number 3, when it comes time, you need to find yourself a good teacher and set about understanding properly whatever those difficult elements of the language are. So Cecilia, I hope that's helpful. If you've got a question that you'd like to ask me, please do. You can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask, and you can leave me a voicemail message there. I'm also giving away 3 free copies of my Language Learning Foundations video course, which is the course that I wish I had when I first started learning new languages. It walks you through my exact step-by-step process of learning and becoming fluent in a new language quickly. If you'd like to win a copy, all you have to do is leave me a star rating and review on iTunes. You can do that by going to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/review. And then after this episode, which is episode 10, has aired, then I'm going to go through and I'm going to pick 3 people at random from all over the world, and they will win a copy of the course, which is worth $97. Now, at the end of every episode, I like to recommend a resource of some kind on the topic of the show. And today we've been talking about completely different languages and the importance of actually spending time with the language, getting that regular exposure every day. But sometimes, that's easier said than done. It's all right if you're learning French or Spanish or a very popular language, but what about something like Arabic? At the moment, I'm learning Egyptian Arabic, and it's very, very difficult for me to find, resources that are of any use at all to me as a beginner. And so the resource I'm going to recommend today has come along recently, and it's been a fantastic addition to the Arabic language resource family. It's called Talk in Arabic. It's been set up by my friend Donovan, and he has put together a huge collection of stuff from all different Arabic dialects, whether you're learning Egyptian or Moroccan or Saudi Arabic. He's got example sentences, he's got lots of dialogues, he's got videos. If you're learning Arabic, this is something that you really do need to check out. If you'd like to check out Talk in Arabic, you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/talk in Arabic, all one word, and that will send you on to the site. You can also find this link and links to anything else that we've talked about in the podcast by going to the show notes, which at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 10. So thanks, Cecilia, for your question. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode, episode 11 of the I Will Teach You a Language podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. And here at Story Learning, everything that I do is powered by stories, whether that's writing books, teaching lessons, crafting courses. My mission is to help everyone succeed at learning a new language through the power of story. And we now have comprehensive language courses in over 15 languages, from Spanish to French, Korean to Japanese, and across all levels from beginner to mastery. And you can take a 7-day free trial of any of these programs by visiting storylearning.com/courses. I've poured my heart and soul into creating these courses over the last 10 or so years, and we've helped tens of thousands of new students achieve their dreams of learning a new language, all through the power of story. So go ahead and take a free trial. There's no commitment. You can try out our method for free. See if this can also be the breakthrough for you that it's been for so many other people. storylearning.com/courses.